we saw 1,430 permits issued for new units. That's a 40% increase over 2014, and in 2014, we would have categorized that 2014 as a strong year as well. So our 1,430 units is above our 5 and 10-year historical averages, which is great. We have our housing split, our multi-single split was 60% multi and 40% single. That's above our goal, our OCP goal of 53% multi. And then our 48% of our new units were located within an urban or village center. However, one area where we were not performing as well was a percentage of new units located in the urban core, and last year saw only 25% of new units in the core. So some of the big highlights where we had about 750 new apartment units. That accounts for over 50% of total units issued a permit. We had 100 and so townhouse units, and then the Highway 97 sector saw the most units in 2015, and they were primarily located within the University South Village Center. So in terms of commercial, we had just over 400,000 square feet of new square footage, and of that, 73% was located within the city center. So this next image kind of highlights the commercial activity from 2015. So the two largest commercial projects were at the intersection of Doyle and Ellis Street. So the largest of these was a new Interior Health Authority building that came in at it's a 5-story building, about 185,000 square feet. The second largest was the Okanagan Center for Innovation. It came in at about 105,000 square feet. And also within the scope of this image, you can see where the Library Parkade expansion would have occurred, as well as the parking lot where the Memorial Parkade expansion, or Memorial Parkade is under construction. This photo's a bit older, so it's still a surface parking lot for that one. So institutional industrial saw less new development than their respective historical averages. Institutional building permits were issued for about 95,000 square feet. This is below the most recent 5 and 10-year average. However, 73% of industrial buildings, new industrial square footage was located within the Highway 97 sector, which is to be anticipated. Institutional development saw about 115,000 square feet, and this is consistent with the most recent 5-year, but below the most recent 10-year average. So some of the significant institutional projects last year was the Memorial Parkade at about 65,000 square feet, as well as the new police services building at about 45,000 square feet. So just to note that 2015 saw no new permits issued for either UBC, Okanagan College, or Kelowna General Hospital, and those are areas that have seen significant institutional investment in the last few years. So like I mentioned earlier, we can use this data to compare back to our OCP projections and see our performance. So the OCP, like I mentioned, projects in 5-year increments to account for fluctuations. So the first increment in the OCP was between 2011 and 2015. So now that we've completed one full increment, we can compare back to our actuals versus our projections. So this graph highlights on the left, the lighter color is our OCP projection for new units required between 2011 and 2015. On the right is our actual based on building permits. So we realized about 77% of our projections. And just to take into account that 2011 and 2012 were some of the lowest performing years we've seen since our data goes back to the late 80s. So I think 77% is quite strong based on that. So we'll apply the same logic to commercial, industrial, and institutional. And so commercial developments actually outpaced our projections in the first 5 years by double. We projected the need for about 850,000 square feet, and we issued permits for about 1.6 million square feet of commercial. So just to make a note, some of the recent parkade development downtown at the Landmark Towers has been categorized as commercial, so that would account for some of that. However, industrial and institutional has not seen the numbers projected in the OCP. In particular, institutional development continues to fluctuate and depends heavily on investment from different levels of government. So to wrap it up, in conclusion, we've seen strong residential numbers overall, but we're not yet achieving the density in the urban core. We're seeing strong commercial numbers with significant development in the urban centers and urban core. And in industrial and institutional, we continue to see growth, but at a slower pace than what our OCP projected. So moving forward, we'll continue to track development and use the data to assist in our decision making. We'll continue to monitor performance relative to the OCP and other plans, and will continue to make the data available to internal and external customers. And finally, the attached report, which I've gone over today, is posted. So that concludes staff comments, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any questions for you? So just maybe a quick comment from myself, and really happy to see the number in regards to the split between single-family homes and multifamily development. And so, it would be our hope that we continue to see that trend carry on, because then it would speak to our continued investment in our town centers, and through things like transportation corridors, increased transit frequency in our town centers, amenities in our town centers. So it looks like, hopefully that trend will continue, and we'll start to see more of that multifamily in our true town centers through things like our urban infill challenge, and being more responsive to we have a trial right now with smaller lot multifamily, smaller lot duplexes, various other things that we know are in the works behind the scenes. But everything, at least now, is trending in the right direction, and hopefully we can do it that way, because we know we need to grow as a community, but we know that we want to limit and make sure that we're working close to where all the amenities are, and get them out of their single occupancy vehicles. So it looks like things are trending in the right direction. A few more years of data trending in that right direction would be a good indicator, but it appears anyways we're on the right track. There's a lot more work to do in the coming years, but thank you for this. And so I need a motion to receive, moved by Councillor Hodge, seconded by Councillor Sin. Any further discussion? In favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, Grant. So moving on down the agenda to item 5.2, and the purpose of this is, for the Kelowna Fire Department Strategic Plan, and the purpose of the 2016-2030 Kelowna Fire Department Strategic Plan is to establish a framework to guide the Kelowna Fire Department, the city executives, and the mayor in 14 years in the delivery of valued protective services to the citizens of Kelowna. The scope of this report includes a comprehensive analysis on all programs and services delivered by the Kelowna Fire Department. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Your Worship. So today I'd like to discuss the Kelowna Fire Department, where we're at today, and our plan on how to change from a traditional fire service to one that's more efficient, dynamic, and flexible in service delivery. So the purpose of the presentation is to provide an overview of what our strategic outcomes are in terms of our vision, mission, and goals. We want to look at the analysis that what makes us different than other centers of 124,000 people, and what are those factors in terms of the risk they pose and for delivery of our service. I'll highlight the innovations and enhancements that we're looking for from Council, Mayor and Council, support for the service delivery option and recommendation in the report. So our outline will answer the question right off the bat is why a KFD strategic plan, and I'll highlight the goals that we had, strategic goals, and the methodology and the process. We'll highlight the innovations and enhance about the summary of the recommendations and the costs. So no surprise here, Your Worship, our vision, mission, and goals are completely aligned with that of the organization. We want to be the best mid-sized fire service in North America, and best being balance, excellence, service, and teamwork. So we're completely aligned with our mission is to lead the development of a safe, vibrant, and sustainable fire service. So like many services in the city, Your Worship, it's impossible for us to provide the same level of service regardless of where you live. If you live in June Springs or Gordon and Harvey, where you're closer to a fire station, the service will be different. So the goal is to provide a risk-based, equitable level of service throughout the city, and based on risk and our assessment of risks. We want to be innovative and non-traditional, to look at different ways of delivering the service. And we have some technology that I'll speak about in the report. We We want to identify performance targets that we believe are realistic and achievable, and not just in terms of operation, but what the city can financially support in terms of our service delivery. We obviously are part of the city and want to align with the corporate goals and the objectives of the organization. Accountability measures. Every member of the Kelowna Fire Department wants to be efficient and accountable in the service that they provide the citizens, and we put a lot of accountability into this report. And we understand that council is faced with a lot of tough decisions with the way the city is growing and the challenges that go forward. So we looked at this report and provide flexibility based on what council sees as priorities. We looked at all our services in terms of fire prevention, training, suppression, our regional services, our dispatch, emergency management, and that this plan will provide a roadmap over the next 14 years to guide mayor and council and city executives and the Kelowna Fire Department in delivery of the service. Our emphasis was on scientific analysis and evidence-based decision as much as possible to remove any emotional or intuitive decisions. We use data to drive our decisions. This is the framework that we used in the development of this plan. It's about balance. The center of the pyramid is financial constraint, and we certainly understand that. But on the one side of the pyramid, we look at this, and the other one is our response capacity. And what's the best service that we can provide that will preserve life, property, and protect the environment? And we also looked at regulations. What are the regulations of the fire service? So we guided this pyramid approach, and what we used to make our decisions as we proceeded through the analysis. I recognize this is a very busy slide, but it's an indication of the types and levels of information that we looked at in the development of this report, right from the very base of the pyramid, looking at what the community profile and growth is. We just had a presentation in terms of what our growth has been. We then identified what are the risks, and I'll talk about these later in my presentation, of what are the risks that Kelowna really needs to look at that makes us different. Our predictive modeling and dynamic deployment system, and I'll talk more about that in my presentation. We considered what the industry standards are. In the top of the pyramid, you look at, we have sound fiscal responsibility, community expectations, what does the community want from its fire service and the level of service. At the top of the pyramid is the subject matter expert. And as much as we try to use the evidence-based analytics to drive it, it still requires a certain amount of subject matter expert, and the chief officers and myself use that in the development of this plan. In 2014, Council supported the procurement of a predictive modeling and dynamic deployment system. This system is housed in dispatch and employs risk-tolerant decisions based on historical data and other related factors to determine what our optimum deployment is. It uses a thing called Bayesian interface or inference, which is a risk concept on what an event will happen over a period of time. And the algorithms that this program used compartmentalized every section of the city and bombarded this data on there to get a sense of what we could see going forward in terms of our service delivery. From the PMDDS, we were able to look at where how good our stations are performing now, where new stations need to be, where there are service gaps. The three concepts in the predictive modeling identifies geographic response, dynamic deployment, and risk-based response. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I should say, this type of analytics and this type of technology was not being used widely in the fire service. It has since come in an effort to make these decisions based on risks. Geographic response is quite simply the road system. You put a fire department in the middle of a neighborhood center, and what's the performance it can do based on the natural and man-made transportation system and relief. So it's simply geographic coverage. Dynamic deployment is, the police use this quite effectively. If you look at center of gravity, they build up for the center of gravity because they know that that's going to be a peak period. So in the terms of the fire service, we know where our peak call volume is. We know that downtown and Water is a station. And dynamic deployment means that we would redeploy resources in those periods that we know there's going to be high volume, in a similar way that the police gear up for special events. And risk-based response, simply matching the response to the incident. You do a dumpster fire with 3 engines and a ladder truck for the minimum amount. And risk-based also talks about the volume that you would have in a particular area of the city in terms of responses. So we use these concepts in our predictive modeling. In the report, I identify assessment factors, and there's a number of them, and these ones are what drove our decision in terms of what the characteristics of our community are and what makes us different. Well, the first one is the city footprint. We grew from 5 village centers. We assumed the infrastructure in terms of fire stations from those 5 previous centers, and they may not be as strategically located as you would if you were starting from greenfield. Look at the type of residential construction types. Rate of growth in the summertime, it's during the peak of the holiday season, the traffic is a challenge, and water flow in neighborhood centers of the city. These are the things that we took a look at that we need to pay attention to. And you see interface risk there is one that we all know every year. So these are the assessment factors that make us more efficient and effective. And that is to employ the concept, we have to balance geographic coverage with risk-based response and dynamic deployment. To deploy all 3 of those, there's more of a reliance on geographic coverage, and I'll talk about that more in the presentation. We want to use in space. What our statistics show us, our technology, we have mobile, we know how long to respond, we know how long it takes for us to get out of a scene, and we know obviously what our call volumes and percentages are. We apply the provincial standards in terms of work safe. And service effectiveness, we've looked at recently, we've trialed utilization of smaller units for our lower risk calls like needle pickups and medical calls and those types of things like this that are of lower risk. So we trialed by using smaller full-blown engine response. So these are the things that we took a look at comparative communities, and there's 20 of them that we studied, and I'll show you the results of that. Distribution is where you place the station, and concentration is what you put in them. For example, out at hazardous material equipment there, and the reason that's there is because that's where the majority of the industrial processes are. So we concentrate that particular response type out in Rutland for that. The last station, career station, we've obviously hired staff, and since 1975, particularly in 2000, to meet the WorkSafe legislation. It was built in 1975 when the population of Kelowna was 50,000 people. We looked at realistic response times, and what we meant by that was both financially risk and safety, balance firefighter safety with public safety, and provide an affordable service. The training standards, there's the government Fire Commissioner playbook that establishes the training standard for interior, full service, and exterior operations. And we also looked at our paid on call, the role of our paid on call, which quite simply is to support the career operation permanent growth boundary and to provide that first response in the areas outside the permanent growth boundary. They are a critical part of our response system, and they have their limitations. So our current system is 122 career with 96 firefighters. We have 45 volunteers. We maintain a minimum, that's 4 engine companies, 4 career firefighters, 2 captain, and a 2-person rescue squad. We have 7 fire stations, 4 career and 3 paid on call. Our engines are staffed in accordance with the BC WorkSafe legislation of 2 in, 2 out, or 4 on an engine. For a typical residential fire, our effective response force, or the number of firefighters that need to be there, and based on industry standards and the construction types and other 16 firefighters to handle 1 single family resident. And our system now has the ability to deal with one of those at a given time. If a fire extends beyond the structure of origin, then we have to rely on the recall of our off-duty and paid-on-call, and I'll show you a model in my presentation on that. We have an alarm assignment and critical tasks. We've evaluated everything from our motor vehicle incidents to our medical first responders. We know what the critical tasks are and how long they take, and we organize them so that we know, and I'll show you in the model, that if we have a small fire somewhere, we respond with the appropriate level of resource. The shift is 2 days, and the day shift's 10 hours for the crew, and that's standard amongst career departments in BC. Let's look at industry standards. And this slide is the dwelling when it's on fire. Look at this, and what I'd like to emphasize is that all our emergencies are contingent, trapped, regardless of what the emergency is, and in particular, and those are the critical times for affect an acceptable level of survivability and restrict from a fire, affect a motor vehicle accident, hazardous material release, types of things. In our comparative communities, we can see we took a look at those that in relation to going on the ranges from 78,000 to 140,000 in the looked at. But from this, we can see that the Kelowna Fire Department call volume, the second lowest ratio of firefighters per capita, and the highest population. And our busy zone is Station 2 and Water Street of 3,165 responses. Also took a look at response time as, again, it's hard to compare other communities with Kelowna because everybody has a different system and there's different characteristics. So, but it does provide, as we can do, 9 on the permanent growth boundary, and outside is 1430. And then you can see the other 80 percentile that you see is typically used for because they get into the protective equipment and respond with the fire truck, so it takes longer, so they get more of a time to do it at 80%. The ones that are in red are, we didn't do the per capita analysis with, but I added them as being similar size and indicating that that they are anywhere from 5 minutes, and you see Delta is achieving or seeking to achieve the 4-minute and travel time with a 1 minute 20 turnout time for their responses in Delta. So what our analysis came up with, and this includes 4 previous studies that have been done in the Kelowna Fire Department, come up with the same results, is that we have some service gaps. And inside the permanent growth boundary is the Glenmore, UBCO, YLW area, and then the Lakeshore, Pandosy, Gordon, and that's more for risk and call volume because of the density of that particular area. And I'll show you a map on that. And outside the permanent growth boundary is McKinley, is fairly isolated out there. We all know one road in at a particular time, the North Glenmore. And then we have a contracted area of Lake Country that we've had a contract since 1996 with Lake Country providing service out there, and part of my recommendations will be to look at that as well. So in terms of our activity level, on average, we're just under 10,000 calls per year, and 93% of these occur within the permanent growth boundary, and it stands to reason that's where a lot of the activity and our citizens live and our industries are located. The 5-year dollar average, the highest, again, no surprise, is those multifamily dwelling fires that we've had, and touch wood, we haven't had one for a while that, like the Legacy Fire and Lequim and Laurentian. And the next biggest contributor to dollar loss is the single-family homes and vehicles and outdoor fires at about $2.3 million per year. So let's take a look at our system. This graphic is my own type of animation. I'll see the outside oval would be to indicate the area outside the permanent growth boundary. The inside lighter one would be the permanent growth boundary. Station 1 is Enterprise, Water Street, Rutland, and then Mission. We have 7, out here Station 7 is Southeast Kelowna, 8 is Glenmore, and 9 is McKinley. So what I want to do here in this graphic is to model how the system works. So the first thing that happens, and this particular one is a garbage can fire at Springfield and Birch. One of the citizens noticed that there's smoke coming out of a garbage can. And this is what happens. And this is typical of the larger portion of our responses, is that one fire truck with 4 firefighters on it would respond to that incident, and if they could mitigate it, they would do that. With our alarm assignment guideline, we have a second alarm. So let's say that the fire now extends into the garage and is starting to threaten the structure. We would send a second engine and a third engine once it's fully into the structure. So this is what's called a second alarm response. You have 3 engines. We backfill with 4 career firefighters and a safety officer, and that's to maintain the geographic coverage, because while we're dealing with this situation, we still have lots of other calls that are going to, and we still have the risk. The risk doesn't go away when we're dealing with one situation. And now the fire has progressed, we're threatening other structures. We commit our 4th engine, and we move our 2 paid-on-call stations up. They actually, there's locations in the city where they park the engine, and they're there to deploy to any other coincidental or sequential emergencies. And this is what's called a third alarm, and we recall an off-duty paid-on duty chief and a platoon captain to help deal with this emergency, because in this case, we're dealing with a big emergency. This would be indicative of the legacy fire, where we bring everybody, and there's one even bigger, which is a muster and a general alarm. There's 2 of those where everybody that works for the Kelowna Fire Department needs to stage, and that means we're in really deep trouble. So this would be how the model works, the current model works for inside the permanent growth boundary. Now outside the permanent growth boundary, we see in this case here, we have a tractor fire at Nature's Gold on 4240 Glenmore. And in this case, what happens is the first paid-on-call, or closest paid-on-call, in this case it's Glenmore Station that goes to the response. And because of the limitations of the paid-on-call system, depending on the time of day in a show, we always back up a paid-on-call response with a crew response. So in this case, you see Enterprise go to augment that response. So in the second alarm situation, you have 2 other engines respond, and we recall the off-duty firefighters to maintain coverage within the permanent growth boundary. And we move one of our station 1. What we're doing, we're moving everything to the center of the city to provide the optimum geographic coverage while we're dealing with this emergency. And then at the third alarm, move up Southeast Kelowna, and then we recall a number of people so that we can deal with the situation we're dealing with, still maintain coverage within the city. And that's how the current system works. So, to or accept the risks the current have. And what our options to would be a phased-in staffing in more area, or the other option is just status quo, and we say, you know what, based on the risk, we're okay with the service delivery the way others. I would staff a station today with 20 people out at Glenmore. I know, and we know, that that's not possible given all the other priorities that council has and the things that need taken care of in the city. So therefore, we're recommending an incremental approach to staffing this station. So phased in staffing, by 2017, if we write the current, we can start providing coverage in 2017. And there's 2 staffing options that I'll speak of. The advantages of this is we address our service gaps. We have an opportunity to enhance our dynamic deployment system by using our geographic coverage, our dynamic deployment and risk-based deployment. There's a number of cost offsets that are the result of this, which I think here is around $460,000 that we project potential cost offsets for the having a fifth station. This one, the costs cost for the fifth station staff it, and I will also speak of that in the report. The current traditional centralized support model, advantage is there's cost containment. We can use the dynamic deployment and risk response to a very basic level, and we maintain our pay-on-calls as a critical support resource. In fact, in both models they are. The disadvantages of the status quo is there's service gaps, a degradation in service. As the city continues to grow, if we don't add to the system, it's just going to increase the risks and our ability to get there in a timely manner. So the staffing options. The option A is to hire 12 in 2017 as part of the budget cycle, and then at 8 in 2019, and that we look to move the Station 5 to 2020. And option B is to hire an 8-4-8 configuration until Station 5 is in 2020. And both of these have their pros and cons. We take the existing two-person rescue unit and we use that staffing to staff the fifth engine company, which causes us issues in terms of our dynamic response for the Lakeshore Pandosy area. And if we only started with 8 firefighters, then we'd have to use increased amount of overtime to provide that service, and it would be some service adjustment based on available staffing. Our preferred option is option A. So in the end, what we're recommending is 5 stations, as you can see here. Again, Enterprise, Water Street, Rutland, the Mission, and Glenmore. Glenmore would be be a composite, including paid on call. And then you'd have Station 7 at Southeast Kelowna and McKinley. You end up with 5 career stations, 5 engine companies, and an engine rescue unit of 2 firefighters, and 3 paid-on-call stations with a minimum duty strength move from 19 to 23, and this would be on full implementation. And one of the advantages of this is that area we talked about in terms of risk response for the Lakeshore Pandosy area. We believe that we can manage that particular risk with a dynamic deployment, and that 2-person unit, the multi-purpose unit that that you see here under mobile engine rescue, and that's for the interim period. So let's have a look at what PMDDS looks like. You see in this first map here, this is what the current system provides from a citywide perspective. Green is good, light green is good, yellow's not too bad, oranges, and these all have time increments assigned to them. And red is where we're outside of our projected our performance target. When we add the new station over here, you can see the new station. Here you can see the difference. Look at McKinley and up Glenmore, and in the airport area, how the colors change because we have increased capacity in that system. If I zoom in on it, it's like you see here, it's more dramatic. You can see the red area here, and all this area is in green. And we chose the area of Glenmore and John Hindle in this area based on what we see in terms of the city's development and where the concentration is going to happen. We modeled a number of scenarios, including placing the station in the roundabout area of the overpass at UBCO, and you just get a corresponding, everything on that side, the east side of the city turns green, as opposed to here. So our enhancements and innovation. The PMDDS is leading technology and provides us with the best information to make these decisions. We use a response based on scientific data. By doing this mobile engine rescue and the 5th station, we avoid Station 6, and we can handle it through our dynamic deployment and risk-based deployment. We want to work with the city of West Kelowna and eliminate the need to replace a $1.2 million ladder by having a service agreement with them. They have a ladder truck, we have a ladder truck. We can have a service agreement back and forth, which avoids purchasing that truck. The response times that we're looking at 7 minutes and 40 seconds in the as a performance target is mid-range amongst the comparative communities. We're not trying to be the best in terms of being the fastest. We just believe that based on our risk assessment and all the data that we looked at, that is the target that we're looking at. And we have a potential cost reduction, it was $420,000 annually with looking at the contract with Lake Country, the need or the adjustment in the number of people we call off duty on overtime to maintain our geographic coverage. So the recommendations is we secure a parcel of land somewhere in the vicinity of the John Hindle Glenmore area that is more of an operational recommendation is that we move to a 1 minute and 40-second turnout time, and that's the time it takes for the firefighters to get the alarm, to get in the vehicles, and the wheels start turning is the turnout time. And for fire, we would be 140, and for medical, it's 120. And the reason for that is you have to put on more protective equipment when you're going to a fire. We want to balance the geographic coverage with incident risk volume, and we've done that within our analytics. Our response time targets, as I indicated, was 740 within the permanent growth boundary and 90% of all calls for service, and outside the permanent growth boundary, we're looking at 11 minutes and 40 seconds in 90% of the time. We will, this year in 2016, we will conduct a detailed review of the Lake Country contract. We have our analytics as well as real-time emergency responses we've looked at, and we believe that we can provide an equitable level of service, particularly with this new Station 5 and the John Hindle extension. We'll be able to do that and protect our own citizens that live in the city. We're going to look at evaluating the need for another fire inspector as part of our going forward in our public education and pre-fire plan programs. When we build Station 5, we look at extending the apron around there and moving our burn building that we have now that's at the landfill, and we move it there so it's more accessible and more functional for us. And we'll continue to market our dispatch services as we've seen recently. The summary of costs. Our capital costs are estimated to be about $9.1 million for property and the station and the equipment. Our operating costs over the 14-year period is averaged out at $3.1 million. And staffing option B is $38,000 less than option A, which is averaged over the 14 years of the plan. In terms of taxation increase, this chart shows the progression of the taxation increase as we move towards 2013. Now, early on in the presentation, I identified the strategic goals that we wanted to try to achieve in the strategic plan. So we looked at risk-based levels of service for all the city area, and we believe with the addition that we can achieve that. It's innovative and non-traditional compared to the traditional one we're in now, and realistic performance targets. And we align with corporate objectives and goals and in terms of a well-run city and a safe city. And we establish accountability measures that we can come back on an annual basis to Mayor and Council and tell you how our system is doing based on our analytics, on our actual experience. And operational implementation based on priorities. We know that there's things that can happen, and the program can change one way or the other based on other corporate priorities. So we understand that. So in conclusion, in our plan, we used leading technology, multiple layers of data, and using evidence analysis, realistic and innovative, efficient performance targets that balance firefighter safety with physical realities and the public safety. This is not a typical approach for a fire department to build this type of report. It's typically done by a consultant, but we believe that the leadership team in the Kelowna Fire Department has the experience and the skill and the knowledge to do this with our analytics. And we've taken a business approach over the last 5 years with the delivery of service for the Kelowna Fire Department, and this serves as an example of that approach. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. Very comprehensive. So we have some questions or comments.
Very detailed analysis. I have a whole bunch of questions that I pulled together as I was reading through this. I'm curious about the performance target of 7 minutes and 40 seconds. And if in fact you were to use an 8-minute target similar to the actual results that, say, Langley is achieving, how many of your red dots would go green? And does the fact that well, I know the fact that you use 7.4 as your performance target changes who's red and who's green. So if you were using 8 similar to a community like Langley, which is fairly comparative to us. I noticed in one of your slides you included Langley, but not in the one where we were doing the comparator for numbers of staff and that. So tell me the rationale for not using the 8-minute mark, which I think we've heard in the past as a target, 8 minutes was the target, but now it's been moved to 7 minutes and 40 seconds?
Your Worship, the 7 minutes and 40 seconds is 1 minute 40 seconds for a turnout and a 6-minute travel time. In the previous studies done, the previous one that I did, I identified a 4-minute response time. So we've taken a more analytical approach using our new technology, and that's why we moved to a 6-minute travel time. And we modeled a number of response times, and it comes down to we can change the areas from green to red. But the bottom line is, in order to change where we're at now, we need to add an existing capacity to the system. So we're at that point where anything that we do to enhance it, we need to add a station and more staffing. It's just, that's the reality of the situation. If we went to 12 minutes, which would put us way beyond, I could show the whole permanent growth boundary and rural area green, but then we have increased risk in terms of our ability to for firefighter and public safety. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and the reason I picked 8 minutes is because it does fall within an acceptable, the 6 to 8 minute standard is still within the acceptable. I didn't go 12 minutes because I know 12 minutes turns the whole chart green. So that's the reason why I picked 8 minutes versus 7 minutes and 40. And I don't know how that skews the numbers because I can't actually play with the tool, but I don't really want to play with the tool either. My second question is the capital infrastructure plan that Council saw, the 2030 infrastructure plan, has construction of station number 5 from 2022 to 2024. So that's the numbers that we're dealing with as Council as we look at the entire capital plan. So, a one-liner in this Council report that says approve moving it to 2020, and I'm like, okay, that's going to have an impact on the whole corporate situation from a capital planning perspective. How does this impact all the balance of our capital plan? This is, I mean, we did this on February 25th. It says 2022 to 2024. This is moving it forward and will have some significant impact on staff resources and work plans to buy land and, get all those ducks in a row when in fact we had planned to do it at a different timeline.
Your Worship, we worked extensively with our infrastructure planning and our capital folks, and we knew that the stations identified for 2022 to 24 timeframe, given the risk assessment and our analytics, we're recommending that move up, and Councillor Given is exactly correct. It would have to have another look at the plan to see what would be adjusted in order to achieve that timeline of 2020, or what options are available to fund the property acquisition and the station. So that team was very much aware that I was making this recommendation today to move it up, and it does require going back to the plan and making those types of amendments.
Okay, so my question would be, they are supportive of it, or is this purely a council decision? I don't know where the financial team is on this because it wasn't in the plan that was presented to us. Yes, no?
Ron, do you want to talk on that one?
No, but go ahead.
Sorry, it's not an easy question, but it's what we have to deal with. That's the balancing of all of the capital projects.
Yeah, what I would suggest that the important thing here is for council to be comfortable with the strategy and how it's laid out. We could always go back and ensure that as it gets now entered into the strategic, the plan for the capital, that's done in a way that's realistic. I think, Joel and his team are busily putting together the infrastructure plan. This has now sort of come somewhat from I'm not going to say left field, because it was been on the go for a long time, but the two have to merge at some point in time. So I think the realistic thing today is to acknowledge that it will be in the plan and to try to find the best place for it to be in the plan, and that may take another iteration. But generally speaking, the council as a whole agrees to the formulation, the strategy in general, and those types of things. How it fits into the plan, I agree, will have to fit in. And of course, the reality is, regardless of whether it's in the 10-year capital plan, there's been lots of things that weren't in the 10-year capital plan that we built, and a lot of things that are in the capital plan that keep moving out because we built things that weren't. That the reality still comes through as part of our whole budget process and as it moves through. So I would suggest the two have to be integrated. And so the first step today is just being generally accepting of the strategy and the reasons for it. How it fits in may require another iteration.
And thank you, and I do appreciate that, and that's typically how these strategic plans come forward, but one of the actual recommendations that council is making is that we actually move it up to 2020, and that one line of our council recommendation is like, oh, okay, do we have to have that in there? Can we accept the overall plan as it is, but have that in context of what it will look like in our capital plan as we move forward, as opposed to a firm commitment that we want it moved up to 2020.
Your Worship, it was my suggestion that ultimately is council's consideration. But at this point in time, if we can't give you the answer of exactly how it fits in, I would suggest that the exact timing then come back at a subsequent meeting with how it fits into the overall plan, if council's comfortable with that.
Thank you, and of course, what year it's built and what year it's ready to go impacts when you hire the staff for it. So if we're planning 2020, that means we're starting to acquire staff now, whereas if we're building 2024, maybe the staffing up isn't the same timeline, but maybe it is. So that was going to be my next question, because when you're having the station available predicates when you start hiring, so it has some significant impacts starting very immediately, well, next year.
Your Worship, the interim plan is to renovate the existing Station 8, and we took a look at Station 8 where it is, and Curtis Road, and those were non-starters in terms of the Agricultural Land Commission decision for that, and then Curtis Road is a public road and not suitable for emergency response. So we look at it, let's get up there and provide the services, address the risk, renovate the station, and where Station 5 fits into the capital program, as the city manager has indicated, is further iterations of the plan.
And do we have an idea of what the cost to renovate Station 8 is, knowing that it will be decommissioned?
60,000, I think. I think it was 60,000, Chief, wasn't it?
Your Worship,
I'm sorry,
it's in
I
the
wasn't
ballpark.
at
It's in
the
the
earlier presentation.
It's in the ballpark of 40 to 60,000 to renovate the station so we can operate out of there.
Okay, and you would operate it as a career once you have done the renovations, is that correct?
Your Worship, it would operate as a composite station.
Composite.
Yes, with career and paid on call operating out of there and providing the service as best we can where it's located.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Gibbon. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Worship. You know, I find myself between managing the public purse and public safety, two really, really big issues. We just heard from Graham March, who pointed out one of the residential highlights, that the University South Village Centre saw 362 new apartments. So certainly the population of the Glenmore UBC area is going to increase. But Chief, I have two questions. One is, you mentioned 2-3 times about the Lake Country contract. Mm-hmm. How far do we go into Lake Country or do we go into Lake Country to fight fires?
We, Your Worship, we don't go into that area. It's contracted out, and it's the WFN reservation that's there as mobile homes, and Jim Bailey Drive, I think.
Would be the
Beaver Lake, go ahead.
Would be the
Beaver Lake
OIB,
Road.
right?
Yes.
WFN OIB.
Yeah.
OKIB.
Yeah.
OKIB, yeah.
Oh, sorry, OKIB.
Yeah.
Correct,
Okay,
that's
sorry.
okay, all right. So Chief, I just wanted to say, big report, big ask, I know. But you mentioned option A and option B. and you talked about overtime. I mean, we can't predict and say, oh, there will be 10 fires in Glenmore. We can't predict that, but on an average, the difference between the two options it doesn't appear to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of at the end when you've said here, sorry, I need to wear my glasses, I'm getting old. It's what, $38,000 or something you said?
That's correct, the difference between
Right.
option A and option
So,
B.
we
Over
would
14
take-
years.
Pardon me?
Over the 14 years, yes.
So if you take into account overtime, and on an average, what would that overtime bill look like? What my concern is, I don't want to see, I don't know how to, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, I wouldn't want us to be penny wise, pound foolish. In the end, land up facing a huge overtime bill. Because the books look good at this stage with a different, like with option B. So if you could speak to that, and
Your Worship, the optimum to staff a station, without getting into a lot of details, is 20 firefighters. By taking out our current staffing for the rescue and adding 12 gives us that 20, but eliminates the rescue until we staff up to 20. That way we can manage the overtime. And the way we do that is we have flex firefighters, and we have periods of time where there's staff that are on duty that we can move them around and manage that. If we went to 8 firefighters, that really only gives us 16 in terms of a staffing complement, meaning we're starting off at 4 short for that 1-year period. The overtime wouldn't be, I can only estimate, I think it's, what was our overtime estimate for shift coverage, was around 86,000. Okay, in the ballpark of 86,000.
that would include all the fire halls, right?
That would be yes, it would be.
So just for one fire hall, my math is not always very good, but it would be approximately
$15,000.
15, 20,000, all right, thank you.
Just, I think you pretty much answered the question, but I had a similar one, so I'll ask it now just because it's on that point. Option A is more expensive on paper right now, but when overtime is factored in, would option B end up being more costly down the road?
Your Worship, that would be correct. We would have to juggle the staffing. 8 is, we can do it, but we have to move around a lot of stuff, and we're going to try to do it without overtime, but overtime will be more expensive with option B.
Would option B allow us to do the review of the contract with Lake Country?
Yes, it would, Your Worship. We're going to do that in 2016 regardless.
Okay, but in the likelihood, though, of having less, less of a complement out there, I guess what I'm getting at is how can we offer that level of service that we're all getting from Lake Country if we have less officers out there, or less firefighters out there, but it'll be looked at anyways.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Stack.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for this comprehensive report. I know, being in council now for many years, we've seen several iterations and development as this has advanced, and from my perspective, I think the report that's before us today is the best one I've seen, and I think it's a very balanced report. So I don't really have too many questions, Your Worship, but just one that I'll lead up with a couple of comments. And overall, I like the strategic direction that this plan is going. I know there's some debate today about exactly the timing. Well, that's a big part of the debate, of course, because there's costs associated. But the overall strategic plan I really like. I've raised my family in Glenmore. I've watched Glenmore go from a quiet little country road to a booming residential area, with Kane Road being in the middle. We know that most of the development that we've been approving lately, there's going to be things heading up toward the McKinley area, which are key, a lot of growth in that area. And from my perspective, the big key to this has always been this should be coming forward when our John Hindle Drive connection goes through, because suddenly we have a major artery that links Glenmore to the UBC airport area. So when I look at the timing of this, to me, that's the place I'm looking for the fit, and it appears from the numbers that you're presenting here, it would be consistent with John Hindle opening. And then also trying to reach a reasonable response time that we can afford as a city, but it also gives the citizens a type of protection. So for me, when I look at all those different numbers, what the fire underwriters had proposed years ago compared to what you're proposing today. It seems to me a very balanced plan. So, saying all that, obviously I am supportive of this direction. A couple of key words you've used in here is, if this was supported today, you would be very happy, but you understand that there's got to be some flexibility based on council priorities. You've said that a couple times. So, can I safe to assume that you're saying to us that you want to have the strategic plan approved, but if somehow this gets delayed or held back a little bit of time, that is acceptable? Not preferable, but acceptable?
Worship, like all big plans the city looks at in terms of expansions, these things happen, the timelines change. My druthers, I've stated it, would be to get into the existing Glenmore station and start operating. If Station 5 doesn't move from the 2024, we'll make it work, we'll do the best we can. Flexibility is exactly as you said. There's a lot of things council has to deal with in terms of the growth of the city, and the RCMP building is a big example of this council's commitment to public safety, and that's a big ticket item. So we understand that. So hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, I think you have. So if we move ahead and we staff up the temporary station in Glenmore, that's going to take care of our public safety, right? And if it gets delayed a little bit beyond that, we will just have to work with it. But overall, Chief, I think it's a very balanced strategic plan, and one that I am comfortable with.
Councillor Dart.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I think most of my questions have been answered, but I only have one, Chief. And no, thank you for the plan. Absolutely. There's a lot of pages here, and thanks very much, although this isn't the first time that we've seen it. Just to refresh my memory, and because we are in the public venue here, because you talked about response time, comparative analysis, and reasonable response time, and then we went to risk management, just refresh my memory and maybe the public's, how many calls, and you've told us this before, are medical opposed to fire? I think it's really important that because we're in the public venue, we the public, understand that.
Your Worship, our annual call volume for medical first responders ranges anywhere from 60 to 65% of our total call volume that are medical response, correct.
Okay, and one other question I had. I guess when all this is said and done, and we'll have some comments later, because it is such a huge capital call, the paid on call, now what happens to that? Do we get less paid on call, or like, I don't understand how the paid on call is going to work with either the renovation or the new fire hall. Just give us a little insight on that.
Your Worship, the paid on call will continue to be there to support the career operations. So in the context of the Glenmore station with the career working in there, they would still train on the Tuesday night. They would maintain their operational skills and abilities, and they would be there for major events like they are now. In the permanent growth boundary, when we have a fire like Legacy Fire, we bring in all our volunteers that are available. So they'll still be there to provide a response. We're hoping that possibly some of the Glenmore, and we haven't asked them this, the Glenmore firefighters would look at joining the McKinley volunteer department, because it's so hard to recruit there. So maybe some of them would like to be part of that station, and that would provide enhanced capability within that area as well. But it would still function the same way as Station 1 had until a couple.
Saying we're going to keep the same complement, you're not going to add paid on call or not take the exact same complement?
The 45 we have now, Worship, I believe is the right balance, given Southeast Kelowna, McKinley, and Glenmore, the operations that we have out there.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Given.
Thank you. Based on some of the further questions that have been asked, and the fact that 60-65% of the medical responses, that would explain why Station 2 is your busiest station. Okay, because it didn't make sense that downtown, when you look at Enterprise Station 1 being so centrally located, so it's that medical response team or response out of Station 2, that's what makes downtown such a high volume station, that's correct?
That would be correct. We've analyzed the Station 2 responses, and the majority of them are medical.
Okay, thank you. And when you're ready for comments, or for our own comments before or after a motion?
Now
Or
would
do
be
you
the
want 'em
time
now?
if you'd
Okay.
like, sure, yeah.
Okay, so from what I've heard and the responses to my questions, I think it makes sense that you invest the, whatever it is, 60,000 to 80,000, whatever it is, to upgrade the existing Station 8, staff it, and reduce risk in Glenmore. To me, that makes sense. And so all of this, I totally buy into. I understand why we have to provide better response out there. And we know that we're building apartments near the university. The university is expanding. There's other area structure plans coming forward. But I do get lost on that final and further that council directs staff to amend the 2030 infrastructure plan. I don't think we have enough knowledge yet to direct staff to do that. So I can see supporting the other recommendations, but until we know what that actually means, I think personally I need more information to that. So my recommendation would be to support all the rest of that. I understand a strategic plan can continue to say we want it built in 2020, but there's more flexibility for council to see it in context of the whole picture. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Gibbon. Councillor Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have any more questions. My councillors have asked all the questions I had. However, we're at the comment stage now, so I guess to me, the first part is I fully support the 2020 thought process as far as when we should be looking at Station 5. Particularly, even after this morning, where we talked about where the future, we're looking at some of the future growth in the plan, and so much of the city down the road, that's where the growth is going to be going, a lot of it. And it's already a struggle, I know, for you people to do the job you do. So that makes sense to me. I think probably the seller for me on your report, and thank you, very thorough, well done as always. For me, the idea that, if I'm correct now, the difference between option A and option B, as far as the funds go, is $38,000 a year. Is that correct? We're still looking at 3.1 over 14 years, but the difference between option A and option B is?
Your worship, we averaged the cost of the plan over the 14 years. So over the 14 years, option A is $38,000. Correction, option B. Option A is $38,000 more just for the base staffing over that period.
Right.
Because you're hiring more staff up front.
Right.
And obviously, the way the plan works, the first 5 years, it's quite a bit more because that's where you're building the
Gotcha.
station
Okay.
staffing. But we took the whole 14 years as our measure.
But at the end of the day, part of my concern as well is recognizing we're doing overtime, all the rest of the scenarios will kick in. In my mind, I still think we're looking at the best scenario financially was to go forward with it now rather than down the road. And I understand that 12.8 is what you're looking at in preference for all the issues involved, and especially the safety aspect. So from my perspective, Mr. Mayor, I'm supportive of the recommendations. I'm not, I don't necessarily, I'm not so much worried about the third point. I'm quite comfortable to go over that today on the recommendations. Councillor Gibbon has suggested she's not comfortable with the directing staff to amend the 2030 infrastructure plan. To me, if we're going to be moving forward with the recommendation, I'm prepared to take it all the way. So, thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hodge. Councillor Singh.
Thanks, Your Worship. I agree with Councillor Hodge on this. I just wanted to put this out there that I am concerned about that region because although we haven't seen projects before us, I know there's a huge project near the landfill site that is being reviewed. Several homes, I don't know how many hundred homes they're being projected for that area. McKinley Beach is coming on stream. There are homes that are going to be built just off McKinley Road, and then there are 200 homes coming up near Clifton, in the north end of, at the end of Clifton, which would still fall in the Glenmore area. So, all that the best bang for our buck that we can get with your overtime calculation and all that would be what you recommend. So having said all that, I know we're taking it forward faster than we earlier planned to, but I, Your Worship, concur with Councillor Hodge, and I would support the Chief's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just add my comments before I go back to Councillors Given and Stack. Okay, where do I start? Well, this won't be anything you haven't heard before, Chief, because we have gone over this this plan already, but it's been a long time in the making, as many people in this room can attest. It's been, you know, beaten up many different times, and I agree with Councillor Stack that of the ones that I've been a part of on council, this is absolutely by far the best one, and we have come a long way. Particularly, and again, you've heard this before, but just to have my comments in an afternoon public session, for those of us who had to sit through that fire underwriters presentation, I'll be honest, it was painful. Because, you know, if they had their way, that we would have a fire hall on every corner, and the response time would be 2 minutes to everywhere in town. And that's just not realistic, obviously. So I think that this plan, as opposed to the others that we've had, really balances what is nice and what is realistic. And so I thank you for that. I like the fact that we are using modern technology to help, again, balance the needs and wants in our community, which then pushes out the need for Station 6. So I appreciate that there's been, the implementation of the new technology, and in order to use that technology to its fullest, we need a full complement, and that means we need a fire hall in Glenmore. Which I don't think anyone would dispute. So I'm actually in favor of, and I think I'm saying the same things, although I don't want to put my mouth. I'm actually okay with the renovation and staffing it now. That's not the issue. But I think it would be very foolish of this council to say, yeah, go ahead, when we just passed a new infrastructure plan, and I think we should actually go to staff for a report to say, how does it impact that? Because that's I don't think that that's slowing anything. I think we're all in agreement that let's get the renovated Glenmore Hall staffed, but when that new hall is built, yeah, I think we actually should balance it against our infrastructure plan. Just, there's nothing wrong with one more staff report to say, hey, how does it impact our brand new infrastructure plan, which we just passed? And so I don't think that we're slowing anything down, or we're not saying that we're not supportive of a Glenmore Hall. All we're saying is one more look from staff who are involved in the process of putting that infrastructure plan together. How does this impact it? And in the end, they may come back to us and say, yeah, 2020 is just fine, carry on. Hey, great, then I will be fully supportive of that. So so what I think is being asked isn't a deal breaker by any means. I just think it's good due diligence on behalf of a council. So that being said, too, when we do staff it, I'm actually in favor of option A as opposed to option B, because I think option B costs us more in the long run than option A does. And so other than that, I think this is a great report, but I think it's good due diligence that we just run this through staff in the infrastructure plan, but I say, yeah, let's get the renovated hall staffed, up and running, because I think that the Glenmore residents and because I don't think any of us would dispute that it's needed in the area. Councillor Given.
Thank you, Your Worship. And as we consider the capital item moving forward, I would like to know what that's going to mean as a tax increase, because somewhere in this report it talks about an increase of 3.1 million per year. So in the chart that we have here, it gives us 0.29%. Well, let me tell you, 3.1 million is not 0.29%. And so that's where we're going to need information from our finance department as to if, in fact, we say yes, what are we committing to for the next tax increase? Because when we say yes to this, we are committing to incremental dollars from a tax increase, I believe, but that's my belief, and I would rather have the finance department say, if you said yes to this in 2020, this is what you're adding to the tax burden, when we know we still have additional increases to come alongside with the police services. So that's why the timing is important, how it relates to additional other facilities that are on the plan. So I would want to know that number as to what we're saying yes to for next year, the year after, and the year after for plus tax increases.
Councillor Stack.
Well, just related to that, Your Worship, I see Janelle sitting up there, and I just wonder if she could share a few lights, because I'm kind of going back and forth. I agree with Councillor Singh and Hodge on a number of these items, but my understanding is also there's financing involved on the station. It's not a straight 100% tax payment in capital, but I just wonder if she might shed some light on this. And then I would have a comment. Thank you.
Sure. Janelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be happy to shed a bit of light regarding the financials. In 2019, what's built into the plan before you today are the capital costs. 8 million would be funded from borrowing, so that's for the land and the building. We'd borrow in the spring borrowing of 2019 in order to have building occur. The debt payments are built in to the plan that you see today with the 0.29% increase. The 0.29% does appear to be quite low, Your Worship. However, what we've done is we've offset the cost reductions. So, for example, the District of Lake Country contract savings are offsetting that increased costs in building and expenses and hiring the new firefighters, therefore resulting in only a 0.29% increase in the first year. So as for the capital expenditure cost in 2019, as I said, there's the building and land, which would be debt borrowed and financed. The new fire equipment, the trucks, for example, they do need to be funded by taxation, and those are 1.1 million. So it would be a 1.1 million ask in the 2019 capital plan that the infrastructure group would need to make some adjustments for. As you know, we have put aside some money through the municipal works funding that, was funded through the BC Assessment desktop review a couple of years ago, and we've put that into the capital reserves for use for municipal works in the future. So I cannot speak for the infrastructure group themselves, but that could be an opportunity for adjustment.
Thank you. Councillor Stack, back to you.
So
Thank you, Janelle.
In your analysis, Janelle, if this was held back to the original plan as per the capital plan, the method of financing would be the same. It's just a matter of when it's implemented. Is that correct?
Your Worship, that's correct. The intent is to borrow in 2019 regardless of option A or B that's presented before you today.
But if this was held back a year, the purchase of the fire trucks could be held back for 1 or 2 years, but we would still be financing the construction of the fire hall.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor
Anyways,
Stack.
so my comment, Your Worship, then is, I'm actually generally in agreement with Councillor Hodge and Singh, as much as that sounds strange. But however, it's not a deal breaker for me, because in my opinion, approving the strategic plan is the key, and we can, and I heard again the chief say that he has some flexibility on the exact timing of this, which I appreciate. So for me, if council favors dropping the final directive, I'm okay with that until further review, because to me, the strategic plan is the key here, and this is the one that I want to embrace.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor DeHart?
Very much. Chief, I think I will reiterate though how I feel, even though a lot of my councillors have already done that. I do believe about the renovation, the staffing, doing that now in the fire hall. That's fine. I guess I keep hearing flexibility, and I guess that's where I want to go, because I am a little concerned